2-2. The Chicago Bulls, we sit here by the graces of God. Somehow, the Chicago Bulls are 2-2. Not something you would have thought after watching them play their first game and even their second game, to be honest, even though they won that one. So, and especially after their third game. But here they are. They're 2-2. We are going to talk about them today. We're going to give a few thoughts on we'll focus more on last night's victory. We're recording this on Wednesday, so they played the Indiana Pacers on or no, recording this on Tuesday. I have my days mixed up. They beat the Indiana Pacers on Monday, and it was their first okay win of the season, I would say, somewhat decent. So we can talk about we'll get into that as the show goes on. But Matt, first, one of our favorite people. Finally, we get to talk about again, as we've had to talk about a million times on this podcast. James Harden was finally traded. That's what we got to start with and on today's show.
It finally happened. Did happen a little bit sooner than I thought. It did seem like he was going to start the season with the Sixers, maybe play a couple games. But I guess in hindsight, Daryl Morey and the Sixers telling him just to stay away and not board the team flight, not letting him on the team flight, probably should have been a little bit of a red flag to us. That oh, wait, they might actually be on to something here. There might be something closer than we think.
Yeah, and if you're not caught up with your James Harden news, which I don't blame you, I really wish I could have just put it out of my mind, but
would have been nice.
Not in that position. Unfortunately, the trade went down at 2 a.m, which also just felt fitting considering how annoying this whole saga has been. So Clippers get James Harden. They also get PJ Tucker. Interestingly enough, it seems like the 76ers maybe I don't know if that was something the Clippers were like, hey, you got to throw him in because, we want a little bit more since we are taking James. But at the same time, PJ is owed, I think, $11 million next season. He's got a player option for next season. He's almost 39 years old. So it could have been a chance for the 76ers just to say, okay, we'll move on. And in Philly, they got a bunch of other role players. So the deal, Harden, PJ Tucker to the Clippers, and then Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Nick Batum, KJ Martin. That's how you add up to the salaries. They all go to Philly, and then Philly also gets a 2028 unprotected first-round pick, protected 2026 first-round pick, and then 2 second-round picks and a 2019 pick swap. So I gotta say,
Philly made out great.
Yeah, considering how ugly this got, considering the Clippers were always the only party really interested, it seemed, in negotiating on a Harden deal. I know that the goal obviously was the same for Daryl Morey as it was when he traded Ben Simmons for James Harden, which was, I want a superstar player in return. I want that co-star right away. But I think what he realized as time went along, which is what I think most of the general consensus always was you're not going to get that kind of return this time around. And so instead, he settles for a very solid package of good veteran contracts mixed with, good future draft capital. So they now have the assets. They now have the pieces to go out potentially at the February trade deadline and find themselves that co-star that they want next to Embiid to make sure he hangs around.
And I think part of it might be too, Tyrese Maxey to start the year. 31 points against the Bucks, 34 points against the Raptors, 26 and 10 against the Blazers. We talked about how we liked his upside this year.
We talked about this.
He might just kind of be that superstar. He might have already shown enough to Daryl Morey where he's comfortable in being all right, I'm going to roll the dice on this guy being superstar number 2. And then if I have to come deadline time, now we have assets to go out and get another superstar and contracts to come.
Well, and I think
by the time the deadline runs up, I know there's a certain amount of time. You can't flip those pieces right away. You have to wait a certain amount of. Is that free agents after they sign a new contract?
Well, free agents, yes, but I also believe they can't. I don't think they can reroute these guys right away. But I would have to go check.
But by the trade deadline in February,
they should be. Oh yeah.
So now what he's done is he's going to give Maxey a shot at being this guy, and then if that doesn't work out, cool. I have these extra first round picks that a Clippers first round pick in 2028. That's a pretty attractive piece if you want to throw that out. Then you have some contracts now you can move around. And oh, by the way, if this works out. You went out and got some veteran players that are good NBA role players, not just throwaway people. And that's something I think the Sixers have kind of lacked in their depth. They haven't really had the depth to go out and compete with Boston's and Milwaukee's come playoff time. And now they at least took somewhat of a step towards that.
Well, yeah, I think they definitely improved their depth a little bit here. I mean, these pieces that we name aren't necessarily the best, but they've been on winning teams, and they'll help in the short term or however long they're there. But I think yeah, it comes down to the picks, right? You add those to the table. I think they have. I don't have it in front of me, but I think they have some of their own as well. So they have the means to go out and get another star. But also, you bring up the Maxi thing, which I think is super important because what that now allows them to do is maybe that piece that they're gonna go get doesn't need to be the same name as a James Harden would have been, a couple of years ago. Like, I think the idea is, and this will segue into our next point that we want to touch on before we get into some of the Bulls' recent games, still ties to the Bulls, however, was just this morning after that trade goes down, Sports Illustrated's Chris Mannix immediately name drops both Zach LaVine and OG Anunoby as two players who are in the early chattering of who Philly could try to pursue later this season, to add into the mix. And so both of those guys, right? Those aren't the names. Those aren't that's not a superstar. You wouldn't consider that necessarily either of those two a superstar caliber player. Maybe both all-star caliber. OG has yet to get there, but LaVine, obviously two-time all-star, I think, could very well have a couple more all-star games under his belt, maybe an all-NBA appearance in the future. Like, that's maybe the type of player you go, okay, I can get one of those guys. And then because we have Maxi, and Maxi could maybe be that number two, or whoever we get could be the number two on some nights, but eventually they believe Maxi can be that guy. So it just changes a little bit the type of asset they might go out and try to get. And that's why I think those two names do make sense. But yeah, I mean, let's briefly we have to touch on that. LaVine, it's just funny to me because LaVine's connected to Philly mostly
He
by
keeps saying he doesn't want to go to Philly, though. Like, he said that, hasn't he?
to
Or
Philly.
was it
No,
New York? New York. Sorry,
yeah.
it was New York.
He keeps getting attached to New York as well. But that's because no, but I mean with Philly, he's been attached to a lot, primarily I would say by fan speculation. There has been some reports early on when the Harden rumors started, and the Dame rumors started that potentially he would be a guy not for Portland but for Philly, and then the Bulls could be part of a 3-team package, and the asset that goes back for Harden is someone like LaVine. So there's been like little droplets here and there about actual reporting where that has been of interest. However, a lot of it has just been like, I think these fan speculation or, Philly should trade Harden to the Bulls, or like there's been betting sites that had odds that, the Bulls were the second or third highest likely team to end up with Harden because, and then that gets the discussion going of, they would trade LaVine for Harden. And I just never understood those conversations. And it's because LaVine is a flawed player. Let me just say that first.
Mhm.
I get it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that LaVine is a superstar. I just a second ago didn't call him a superstar. But this idea that LaVine is the type of player that you just salary dump, I have never understood. And it's really, really caught fire after we saw people do that with or when that was the discussion around Bradley Beal this offseason. The Phoenix Suns, Bradley, they wanted to start a rebuild. Clearly, the Washington Wizards, they wanted
Mhm.
to get off Beal. Beal finally decided he wanted to go elsewhere. So they accept a bunch of second round picks basically for for Bradley Beal, and then they got some pick swaps and stuff in there, but it wasn't the type of package you'd expect for somebody who has built up the resume that Beal has. And a lot of people see LaVine and Beal on similar levels. I could go more into it because LaVine's been a lot better than Beal in recent years, I would say. But also, the thing that's always left out is that Beal had a no trade clause, and that completely impacted the leverage and
Yeah.
how discussions could go, and why Washington was like, you know what, fine, like we just want to start fresh, go. So it's all dependent on the actual situation and the very rare thing that Beal had, which was a no trade clause. LaVine, I think, is a 28-year-old, two-time All-Star, finished top 3 in scoring last season over the second half of the year. Dropped 51 the other night. Say what you will. He has 0 assists, but say what you will. The 51 points. Like, yeah, the team lost by 16, but you see that
It's
he
not
is
his fault the team couldn't make a shot.
right. But you just see, you see who LaVine is a player. I have no question if he went to Philly, he would be a very solid addition for them. He'd be considered great. And it's not surprising to me that so much of the national media continues to push for like a LaVine to Philly scenario because he would fit awesome next to Embiid and it would make a lot of sense. And that's just because he's a good player. So I don't know. I just hate all these discussions about, they should just when he was tied to the James Harden stuff, it always confused me. The fact Philly currently is still interested in him also speaks to the fact that, hey, like he isn't the type of player you salary dump. clearly they're like, okay, we got these assets now. Right away, people think LaVine or Anunoby, and Anunoby is very well respected around the league. Two players that are very good. Like the fact that Philly still is interested in those guys should speak to the fact that yes, LaVine is a good player. You don't just get rid of him. You should get something back for it.
Yeah, now like with all these picks and the assets that Philly has, like I've become a whole lot more intrigued by the prospect of that deal if this
Sure, yeah.
doesn't like if this season doesn't go well, it doesn't go the way we hope it does. And it's already starting to look like it's probably not going to go the way that the Bulls would have thought it would have. So yeah, like that's a move that makes sense. And they now have those assets. Like we joke about the 2027, 2028, 2029 first round picks, but like those are unprotected first round picks that around those years are going to become very valuable because those teams are going to be at the end of their windows or probably already past their windows of contending with the superstars they have. So like, I'm not rooting for a Zach LaVine trade because I want it to work out here, but it's nice to know that probably the most aggressive team, the team that would be the most aggressive in going for him, just loaded up on even more assets that could be intriguing to the Bulls.
Yeah, one of the I would consider Philly, especially when we hear the a type of rumor like we do this morning right away. Yeah, I would consider them definitely one of the teams that should be higher on the list to keep an eye on teams that have the assets that would go and get them. And I agree. What they have now, I think they're kind of lacking maybe that one player to throw in there that you would want. Especially when the deadline comes, something we need to remember is like we can talk about what we think the price is and stuff, but you always have to put, I think, like a little extra on top, especially when it's an in-season trade, because like the pressure's on, especially if it's a deadline. The opposing team or the team that's trading the superstars usually going to have more leverage unless that player is asking out, which LaVine has given no indication that he will do. Then the Bulls have pretty much all the leverage in the world, and I think what they would want in return is some sort of young player, because also theoretically, you move LaVine, you're starting a rebuild, or at least you should be. That's what I've remained consistent about. You trade DeMar, it's a different story, right? Then you could try to retool. Vooch is re-signed for a while. It is what it is. You try to maybe piece something together, and maybe you go the opposite way and try to get someone of DeMar caliber or higher to put next to LaVine or whatever. But if you trade LaVine, you trade DeMar, and you have to do something with Vooch eventually,
Yeah,
and that's it.
that is the rebuild. Like that's the signaling. The DeMar thing, like you said, like you can tinker around stuff, but if you trade LaVine, that's it.
So in that case, Philly with these picks, they're good picks, and I would have to pull up their full board to really get an idea. But yeah, the 2028 unprotected first round pick immediately is an intriguing piece via
especially from
the
the Clippers, they're going to be terrible by then.
Yeah, they should be. And then and we don't know what the protections are on the 2026 pick, but yeah, then there's a 2029 pick swap with the Clippers, I believe. So that's also intriguing, and so the only thing missing for me would be that one clear young player, because they're not going to get like a guy like Maxey in it, obviously.
Yeah.
And there's not really any other piece there, but it could be a multi-team trade, whatever. Overall, though, agreed. I think Philly now is a little more interesting as a potential trade partner, and that continues to be something for us to watch out for moving forward. Okay, the next thing here that I want to just touch on before we get into the Bulls games would just be any week one standouts. Matt, I don't know if anything's popped up in your mind over this first week of NBA action, but I have definitely I've enjoyed the games. I want to say that. I feel like we've seen actually some very good games over the first week or so of the season. This includes, it's been real. I've loved watching myself some Wembanyama. I've made an effort to
He's so
make
good.
sure I keep seeing him on the floor. But Nuggets continue to look absolutely unstoppable. I will say they're 4-0 to start the year.
That's what jumped out to me was there's just no hangover. There's no hangover. They lost Bruce Brown, whatever, doesn't really matter. We'll fill somebody else in. Michael Porter Jr. is averaging a double-double to start the year. Murray's putting up 20 a game. Jokic is averaging nearly a triple-double again. Like those guys just not missing a beat, I guess makes some sense given just like Jokic's personality and Murray's personality. Like maybe that makes sense because they just seem to be the most business guys ever. But just dominating from day one. Like they haven't really, like the Jazz, they beat by 8 last night. I think 2 of their 4 wins are double digits, not really even all that close. Like they've just been so good again.
Yeah, I would say, and the team that's similar to that, but that actually experienced even more change is the Celtics for me at the top of the East right now. Like the Celtics adding Porzingis and Drew Holiday, Porzingis has looked great. Like it's been they haven't had the stiffest of. I mean, well, I guess they started with Knicks and Heat, which is a two, which is tough, and then they had the Wizards, who they just took, they absolutely demolished. But yeah, those two look to be fitting in pretty effortlessly. Whereas the Giannis and Dame pairing has been a little hot and cold. We've seen Dame have a great first game, really struggle in the second game. The defense is definitely taking a big hit, which is, of course, to be expected. I think those two will figure it out, obviously. But, with the Bulls, for example, like to tie it back to them, obviously, they have 3 games against Milwaukee coming up over these first 25 games of the season.
Now's the
And
time to get them.
yeah, I mean, now's the time to steal one of those. And in Chicago, to their credit, played really, really well against Milwaukee last season. Even though it was a down year for them, those games were very entertaining. They split the series, I believe, on the year, and had a good run at it. So especially taking away Drew, who's going to take either LaVine or DeRozan out of the game at times, I really do think that there's an opportunity there for them to squeak out some potentially a win over a team like Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, otherwise, things
Phoenix has been good. Like no Bradley Beal so far. They're 2-1.
And like Devin Booker's barely played. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's been. I mean, our biggest questions going into the year with them was their depth beyond those big three, and like
the depth is looking.
KD's played well, but like so is the depth. The depth has been there so far. Again, 2 games in, but I mean they beat the Warriors, they smoked the Jazz, they lost a tight contested game at the Lakers, and I think we're both pretty high in the Lakers this year. So early, but they've looked solid so far.
Well, and just to finish up we'll wrap it up here with just some West, just to, because we're always going to talk Eastern Conference. So just to satisfy ourselves and and wrap up with a little bit of Western Conference talk. The Warriors, to me, same thing. I mean, they have looked, obviously Steph continues to look great, but they're getting good minutes they're getting good minutes from Moses Moody. Chris Paul was coming off the bench the other night. Chris Paul looks great. He's just because he's in that more minor role, just gets to play the facilitator. Last night, I was especially just really floored watching how Chris Paul ran the floor with somebody like Trace Jackson Davis, their rookie, who was just playing in his second game of his career. He had, I believe, 13 points, 9 rebounds, but he was moving really well. I watched a lot of him at Indiana.
He's a really talented basketball player.
Yeah, and they stole him in the second round. Like
it's wild that, like, to me, and this is going off on a completely different tangent, but it shows maybe the casual basketball fan I am. It's wild to me that so many like star players, it seems like 3 or 4 years in Indiana, but he was there multiple years. Like he was awesome at Indiana. Like he's just a really good basketball player, and nobody thought he was a first round pick. Obviously, the Warriors are a team that has built up, reputation and can afford to, take risks on guys like that with maybe lower ceilings but higher floors. But I mean, so far it seems like he's in a perfect situation. Yeah, he's got a lot of talent. He's good.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, it just happens where these teams just let a guy like Io DeSumo, the same thing, a proven college player, and then what happens?
Yeah.
He ends up falling to the Bulls in the second round, and he's been, obviously up and down, but pretty solid considering where they got him in the draft to start his career. So you always got to watch out for those guys, and the Warriors in particular. That's a great organization for somebody like him to. Oh, my dog appeared in the background.
I was just gonna say she's floating.
My dog just float. Oh, I gotta sit down. Itching. Okay,
that's all right.
Itching for Bulls talk. So let's just move to that. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's talk about the Bulls.
Okay, so the Bulls are 2-2. And
how does that make you feel, Eli?
It's been a roller coaster to start the year, to say the least. And I think, my dog's trying to get on my lap.
That's all right. We can have a guest on the podcast. That's okay.
Hey, come on. Not now. So yeah, the Bulls 2-2 to start the year. And for me, it's been a roller coaster, as it's probably been for everybody. I think they could very well be 0-4. Let's just start there, because that Raptors win was one of the craziest, most drunk games I have pretty much ever seen.
Yeah.
The ending where DeMar misses, 3 free throws to either tie or take the lead.
I don't know if it was because I was messaging you a little bit, but I was also messaging Alyssa, who was working the game. And I forgot. It was like, I want to be so mad at DeMar, but DeMar is also the only reason the Bulls are in a chance to win this game. But like, also just make one of those free
Yeah.
throws.
No, I was super frustrated because he scores 18 points in the first quarter. I believe he scored 18 of the team's last 22 it was. And yeah, I mean the only reason they were really in a position were him and Caruso who was really the star of that one. But I agree, conflicted because at the end he kept missing those crucial free throws. But yeah, the star of that one was Caruso. Without him, they don't win it. He hit the game winner obviously, but also had a couple of turnovers late in that fourth quarter that I mean, he's just a special defender. It's stuff we already know.
Last night too, he was making some of those plays. Like he's
Yeah,
so good. He's
it's
so tough to play against, and he's just all over the floor.
I think that's what it is. There's not many players in the league for me that can cover as much ground as quickly
His
as he does.
closing speed is
And
insane.
it's easy to just go, hey, it's just because he hustles harder than everybody else. But no, like you have to be gifted to do what he does. And it's not just about hustle. Not anybody can,
It's
play
anticipation
that
too.
style. Yeah, it's just the defensive instincts, it's the timing. He had, especially in that Raptors game, he had one of those inbounds, which ended up leading to a DeMar and one to in like the final 12 seconds. The Pacers inbounded the ball. He follows, I don't remember who it was, might have been Anunoby, and jumps up in the air. The Raptors still come away with the ball, but it's kind of loose on the ground. And he's then, while he's on the ground, is able to swat it at the right time out of his hands, still come up with it. So just these little things, that the way he's able to impact the game and find ways to make those key stops is just always incredibly impressive. But yeah, that Toronto game, as we were saying, that could have easily been a loss, and they were able to creep that one out. Pacers game, go to this is last night now. They end up winning, I believe it was 112 to 105.
112-105.
And they could have very easily lost that game as well, because the Pacers ended up going 9 of 31 on wide open threes. So they shot 31 wide open threes last night, and the Bulls got lucky that they missed. And teams have cold shooting nights. Like that's how it goes, especially when you shoot as many threes.
We know that pretty well.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when you have a Pacers team that's going to shoot as many threes as this Pacers team seems like they will. But
46 last night. Wow.
Yeah, 12 of 46. That's what it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like I said, 31 of those were considered wide open by NBA stats. So it's they got lucky that they missed those, and that's why easily 0-4. At the same time, I sit here and I go, that's the NBA, right? Like a bad bounce that dictates a lot of games. Usually, you don't see it happen this many times in the first 4 games. But and that just might be what this Bulls team is. That's because they're so average, because they're probably going to play in a lot of close games. There's going to be games where it is a bounce that just dictates how things go. But I think what I want to start with to get into this is maybe some of the positives before we go into why I'm not fully still bought in, obviously, at being 2-2. Positive wise, I think the reason they picked up these 2 wins would be because of what they've been able to do around the margins. Last year, if you compare them to last year's team, the Bulls would constantly lose in crucial categories, right? The game against the Raptors was really the epitome of this last year. Not the play-in, it was just a regular season game, but the Bulls end up shooting 52% from the floor. The Raptors shot 40% from the floor. The Bulls lost that game. In no world are you really going to ever see that happen unless you're losing the second chance points battle. You're committing too many turnovers. You're sending a team to the line too much. Like all these other little categories, right? It doesn't just come down to, how efficiently are you shooting the ball. That's why Billy Donovan talked about in the offseason, Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, DeMar DeRozan, they each had some of their best seasons of their career last year when you look at it on an individual basis. But our team still only won 40 games. It's because you need to win in those other areas. So for the Bulls to start the year, they've done a lot better job at winning in those departments, thus putting themselves in a position to squeak out weird wins in like these close games and start the year 2-0 in clutch games. For instance, the offensive rebounding stands out the most to me. They're averaging
totally agree.
Yeah, they're averaging the 4th most second chance points to start the season. They're top 8 in offensive rebounds per game through their first 4 games. And then this is a side thing, but they're 9th in points off turnovers, which I pointed out. And they were solid on points off turnovers last year as well, just because, they have guys that pressure the ball, and Caruso's obviously very good.
Really good.
But to me, Matt, the second chance points thing is huge. That's something that they talked about wanting to improve, was the offensive rebounding. this off season. And to this point, I would say it's about the only thing they have really shown progress in. But they've basically won that battle in every game. So when you're doing that in these close games against Indiana and against Toronto, you're that much more likely to pick up the win, right?
Yeah, like it's like you said, they're doing a lot of the little things like that. Like the hustle seems, and this is going to sound like meatballish, but like Torrey Craig has brought. I talked about before the year, like Torrey Craig, I think brings a bench mob mentality that Chicago fell in love with all those years ago with Derrick Rose and like that team, and like I feel like he brings that, and I feel like this team has played with that a little bit more, with the exception of Patrick Williams, probably. But like Torrey Craig has been very good. Like there's been a lot of hustle. They haven't really been producing the way they wanted. They haven't been shooting the way they wanted. Offensively, they are really struggling to find an identity. And we can talk about last night's game a little bit more. It was kind of irritating listening to the post-game show and watching on NBC Sports Chicago how they were almost praising them for finding their identity of only shooting 17 threes. Okay. I guess whatever. I'll take us into the negative there. That's the negative so far for me.
Yeah, no.
The offensive identity. If that's your offensive identity, this ain't gonna work. 17-3, and I get the thought of this team isn't a great 3-point shooting team right now. Fine, you don't have to take 45 a night, but 17 isn't enough, and this is not a sustainable way to win basketball games. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a cut when you need stitches. Like, it's not going to work. It's going to stop the bleeding for 20 seconds, and it might look good for a little bit, but in about 5 minutes, when blood's everywhere over your arm and you're getting infected, you're going to be a little bit annoyed.
Yeah, the Bulls put pressure on the wound in this game, right? But then they're still on their way to the hospital. Like, there's if they keep shooting with this dynamic, and it's fine. I think we can move on to some of the concerns because, like we said, for me, that's really the only positive that we've seen thus far is, hey, they said they wanted to improve offensive rebounding. They did that. I guess the other thing I would throw out there specifically from last night's game would just be that, the free throw line, that was another thing they wanted to do is
they're doing a better job getting there. It's not great, but better.
Yeah, they were, I think it was,
see, I got
18 for 19 between DeRozan and Levine last night, which was good to see.
Yeah, last year overall, 26-31 from the free throw line. Pretty solid.
Yeah, and so the thing for DeRozan and Levine, especially, like they had off shooting nights, but they still were able to crack 20 points alongside Vucevic and finish in the plus because of their ability to get to the line. And that was a big thing that they wanted to see improve. And specifically in this matchup, I was encouraged by their ability to do that because Indiana came into the game letting up 58 points in the paint per game for the first, or they let up 58 points in the paint in each of their first two games. Last season, they gave up the fourth most per game. So this team, while they added Toppin, they added Bruce Brown, which that'll help defensively at times. Like they still let guys get into the paint. And either you need to finish strong at the rim or you need to, force your way to the free throw line. So the Bulls kind of matchup wise, I actually felt like, hey, they read the game, they read the game plan, and
I'm glad you brought up the word matchup there because again, as I was watching the post game show, that is the one thing I kind of heard and agreed with mostly was they did a good job of identifying the matchups that they had favor in on each possession, and a lot of times toward down the stretch, it was Vooch signaling, hey, I got a guard on me. Hey, I got someone small on me. Let me go to work. And they did that. There were a couple times real late in the game where they did that. Vooch drove, got him a bucket. Like, those are the types of things they're going to need to start doing more often. And obviously, Indiana, like you said, created a matchup problem. The Bulls created a matchup problem down low for Indiana. The Bulls exploited that. But, like, you can't shoot 17 threes.
Yeah, well, that and the thing, too, with exploiting the matchup, it's just such a low bar because it's like that's what you're supposed to do. But for this Bulls team, that's what they've really struggled with.
Got to walk before you can run, Eli.
Yeah, especially without a true point guard, they've just really struggled at times to recognize when certain mismatches are out there. And I thought with Vooch last night, they fed him at the right times, and not only at the right times, but consistently throughout the game. And I'm not one of those guys I've said on the show before that's like you need to do everything through Vooch. That slows things down. It's not the way that this team should be playing. But like with OKC, and they didn't do when he had that clear advantage down low, which we talked about on the show, and they didn't feed him throughout the game. I thought they did that last night. And, Vooch also made an effort, like throwing his hands up on that one in the fourth quarter when he was
on the baseline.
He's like, come on. And so they gave it to him, and then he went right at Halliburton and scored that easy and one. So he was 10-19 last night, 24 points, 17 rebounds. Funny enough, he was dead even on plus minus, but sometimes that's a wonky stat. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, it was a good game from him, and he deserves props because it was definitely his efficiency. He was the most efficient scorer on the night for Chicago, and out of the big three at least, and his ability to control the paint really made a difference in that game. And he also was good on the offensive glass. So that's another positive there. But to go to the negatives, because at the end of the day, this is still not a convincing victory. I would say it's not a convincing offensive system. And we'll go to what you said, right? You shot 17 threes. And I'm worried after watching them win this game that they go,
Oh yeah.
you
Wait,
know,
this works. We can do this. Yep.
especially when, like you said, post-game show, they're talking about it. I see fans online keep talking about how, it's not their game. They can't shit. That's not how this works. This is, I understand this idea of it's not their game, but okay, fine. Last year, they didn't give a crap about shooting threes. And where did it lead them? 40 and 42. Okay. And so I'm not as I just think it's ridiculous to totally throw out this idea of they don't need to shoot threes. This is who they are, whatever. Because if you really want to look at the numbers, the mid no team that they're playing is going to shoot 12 of 46 or whatever it was from three, right? All the
Hmm.
time. That's not always going to happen. So they got lucky from Indiana that happened. But also, if you want to sit there and make the case that they're this amazing mid range team, that's what they should do. I agree. DeRozan's a great mid-range player. What I don't agree with is that the entire team is this great mid-range team because
No.
they shot 39.5% from mid-range last night. All right.
The
So
amount of times I listened to just about every post game show on the Score. The amount of times after a loss last year that I heard Bill Wennington break down the box score and be like, "Good news, Bulls shot 35% from three. Bad news, they only took 22 threes. Good news is, say they lost to the Pacers. The Pacers shot 28% from three, but they took X amount of threes and it
yeah.
actually equaled into more points because they
Yes.
took threes. So, like,
Yeah. It's a numbers game. We always say this. It's a numbers game in the NBA. So you can't just match threes with twos, right? And
no,
you just it's
I'm
not
not
a
saying you got to be the
system.
Warriors and lead the league in threes every year, but we have to put up more than 17. It doesn't need to be 40 every night like they were doing. And yeah, is there some truth to them probably forcing threes early? And maybe not the best shot on a possession, but they're putting up threes for the sake of taking threes. Yeah, probably. That's probably not the solution we want, but 17 is also not. That ain't
Right.
it either. We have
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
meet in the
So,
middle.
and that's the thing. I don't want to like rip on him too much because it's one game. It's just how it's what happened. So maybe the truth does end up for them somewhere in the middle. But I tweeted it this morning. I shared the shot chart. You can go look at the shot chart. It's not pretty. Like I said, 39.5% from mid range. So it's not like they shot stellar from mid range at all. And they don't need to take, like you said, 40 plus threes a game. They they need to take more than 30 though, because that is
Hmm.
the league average usually. And you want to be right around league average or higher because you want to put yourself in a position to keep up with teams. And you want to make sure it's not a forgotten thing in your offense. So I definitely worry with this game that they saw themselves win and they also believe, look, we don't need to do this new offense where we're shooting threes and we're moving the ball with pace because look, also in the last 5 minutes of the game, our most crucial buckets came on ISO possessions by DeMar and by Zach. Like, I hope that's not their mindset moving forward because you still need to diversify your offense.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're just going to be where you were last year, where the offense was completely stale. It was extremely predictable. So one thing I do want to say is I agree that when the game slows down at the end and you're in clutch situations and you're in crunch time, I will accept some ISO ball. Like I
Absolutely. That is
100%.
the NBA. That's a thing that happens. Like when the
Yeah.
Bucks now this year it's different because they have Lillard, but like when the going got tough for the Bucks in just about every year for the last 3 years, it's like, all right, where's Giannis? Get him the ball late, let him figure it out. Like go, like that's what. And I'm not saying Levine and DeMar Giannis, but like they're very good ISO players. Like when you need a bucket late, there's nothing wrong with that. But that can't be your go-to offense in the middle of the second
Right. You
quarter.
can't do and the your turn, my turn thing that a lot of us complained about last year. It wasn't that it was necessarily happening, with 2 minutes left on the clock. It was that it was happening just throughout the game, throughout the
Hmm.
night. And yeah, and it would just be super predictable in the off, whatever. So I think that's another thing that can get a little bit confusing with with fans and when watching the game is just like anytime they see the ISO ball, they get frustrated. But I understand there's going to be times in the game where you have to turn with it, and especially when you have two scorers that are as efficient in those situations as LaVine and DeRozan. But what you want to see is what they did, I think at least, at the end of last night's game, which is in a minute, that final minute and like 20, I believe, they had a stretch there where LaVine, DeRozan, and Vooch all scored. So while it was an ISO, two ISOs, I believe, by DeRozan,
Mm-hmm.
one by LaVine, and then Vooch, that pass we talked about earlier where he called for it and then went right at
Mm-hmm.
Tyrese Halliburton. That was technically assisted. So only one assist on those 5 buckets looks a little weird, but they all scored. They were all good buckets. Like DeRozan easily blew by, the Pacers defense. They were attacking Tyrese Halliburton specifically on some of these. It's also not like it was totally all, just all one guy takes the ball up the court and goes at the rim. There was some off ball stuff going on, and some some screening that was important off the ball and to set up some of this stuff. But yeah, at the end of the game, like games, that's going to have to happen sometimes. I was just at least encouraged that it wasn't just DeRozan, boom, boom, boom. It was, switching off. All of them contributed at the end of the game, which
Mm-hmm.
at least was somewhat important. But I
Agreed.
mean, yeah, this fell into, I don't know how we got there. 3-pointers. That's you can't, let's not watch this game and assume that they can't shoot anymore. That's what we don't want this to turn into. Okay. Other things from that Pacers game for me, we talked about the free throw stuff, which I think is important and I hope to see continue because there's no reason that LaVine also shouldn't be getting to the line very consistently. It's something that he's obviously a great downhill player and he's going to be good at. But another concern for me though was just defensively. I know that they ended up finishing that game a positive in the turnover department, and their defense did kind of ramp things up at the end. After watching the Pistons game and this game, I still think there's a lot of just straight line drives to the rim that they're giving up, and some of that can be when the bench is off the floor, obviously, and you're leaning on Kobe and
Mm-hmm.
the starters. But that Pistons game was the biggest example, and maybe it was tired legs. I don't know, but the Pistons technically also had
They
tired
had
legs.
tired legs too, and they probably had a worse travel night than the Bulls did. The only thing's
Yeah,
different, they got to sleep in their own bed, but who cares?
right. So, in that game definitely frustrated me because I'm trying to pull it up here, but the points in the paint
They
was
seem to lose track of
ridiculous.
their man near the hoop a lot defensively. Whether it was an offensive rebound, whether it was getting like the ball getting into the paint, there seemed to be a lot of times where Bulls defenders just kind of lost track of their person. And like we talked about how they were doing for the most part this year, a lot of the little things right. That was one of the nights I should say, where like it almost felt like they felt sorry for themselves being on a second end of a back to back and just kind of like
I agree. Yeah.
just assumed that the Pistons were going to be tired too. And when they weren't, like, oh, okay, well, this is over. Like that's really the feeling I got.
Yeah, well, and that's the big thing too with this team, and why I kind of vouch for a change to the starting lineup. I think we can probably end with this. Is I
Corey.
maybe by the time people, or maybe by tomorrow night when they play the Mavericks, we'll see it. But Patrick Williams stayed in the starting lineup for the Pacers game, which I was just surprised about. I thought it would kind of be after that Pistons game where he ended up playing like 13 total minutes or something crazy and only scored 0 points. I just thought that would be it. He would be on the bench, and Torrey Craig would enter the starting lineup, and Craig has played amazing so far. I'm not. I also don't want to, when I say this and I write this and stuff, like I'm not trying to make it sound like I think this is going to completely change the trajectory of the Chicago Bulls. Like I
No, but
understand that,
I think it gives the starting lineup an infusion of energy.
right? Well,
Like
that's
it
what it's all
gives them
about. It's
what gives the lineup what they need, quite honestly. Like it's the one thing their starting lineup doesn't really have is an energy guy who's going to crash the offensive boards, like play really good defense and kind of be that grinder, intangibles, X factor kind of guy. And we're hoping Patrick Williams could turn into that, but he's not, and he hasn't
especially
come
when
close to
someone's
it.
out there with Vooch. We're just like, a lot of times, like I feel like we're watching possessions and we're like, someone go cut to the rim, go go go. Like
Yeah,
Torrey's always going to
Torrey
do that.
Craig does that. He's moving. He's
Yeah,
not stagnant.
and so I think there's sometimes this idea when we talk about this, putting him in the starting lineup or whatever, some people are like, that's not going to change that much. But like, let's remember here that we're on game 4 And our job is to evaluate this team on a game-to-game basis
Yeah.
and to, like, provide analysis and talk
We're
about the
not
team.
saying it's going to make them an NBA title contender.
No,
I
I'm
just
just
think it makes
saying
them a better basketball team right now.
yeah, I just say you do what is gonna make you better the next game. Even if you still lose, I'm just trying to think about this from a standpoint of what makes the team better for the next game
Hmm.
and or in the next couple of games. And in my opinion right now, that sure seems like it would be Torrey Craig in the starting lineup. And even for Patrick Williams, putting him in the second unit maybe, lights a fire under him. But he's not closing right now, so I don't understand why you wouldn't do it. He's barely playing in the fourth quarter. So
Yeah, the
I just
Raptors game, he
think
played 13 minutes, and I think he only played 3 in the second half without a minute in the fourth quarter. Like, Billy
right.
doesn't trust him.
And this isn't me either bashing Williams either. Like, I do agree he needs to step up, but I just think it's better for him. He clearly looks lost out there. It doesn't seem like he's had a lot of confidence. I thought he at least played a little more assertive against Indiana, had a couple nice drives at Miles Turner. He grabbed 4 rebounds, which is actually okay for Patrick Williams. But, it hasn't been there. So for me, I think with Torrey Craig, it's at least something worth trying, something considering, because like you said, that's what the starting lineup seems to be lacking right now. Kobe White can bring a little bit of that energy sometimes, but Craig's just the veteran dude. He's done it forever. So I wouldn't mind seeing that. And also Craig just embraces that physicality,
He does.
which against a team like the Pacers was so important. The Pistons, that's what they didn't do that I feel like they should have done more of. But Indiana, like the Bulls won that game also in the second half because I think the bench came in, embraced some of that physicality. It got the rest of the team to do so as well. We saw Zach get chippy,
Hmm.
which was
Got technical.
surprising. Yeah, and that was a dumb technical, but it was still like, hey, this team's ramped up. This is energetic. And a lot of that was the bench. It was the bench combining for 4 blocks, for 5 steals. Like they were doing everything. And so I think adding at least one of those pieces to the starting unit can maybe create a little bit more consistency throughout the game. So we'll see. We'll see if they make the change. I really have a feeling that it's coming, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
All right, though, that's where we're at. 2-2. The most meh. Well, I guess 2-2 is meh, right? It's very average.
It's
So
about on brand for this team. Water
so
always finds its level, Eli.
so yeah. Oh, good one. All right. Well, that's what we're gonna finish with. We will come back to you probably later this week. They play the
Let's see, they play
Mavericks.
tomorrow and then Friday.
Yes, and then they also play again this weekend against the Nuggets. So they play
Maybe a
Mavericks.
Thursday afternoon to recap tomorrow and kind of preview the weekend a little bit. We'll
I
figure it
think
out. Thursday or Friday.
yeah, we'll figure it out. I think but yeah, they have Luka. Then they got a Brooklyn team for their first in-season tournament game. So that's something that we should discuss later this week.
Ooh, yeah.
And
In-season tournament predictions. We got to make our predictions because that's a thing.
yeah, that's a thing that people like. And then the Brooklyn Nets. Oh yeah, the Brooklyn Nets. That'll be that game. And then the Nuggets will be
That
on the
should go
board
well.
this weekend. So Luka and Jokic this week. Fun stuff for the Bulls. Thank you for listening, everybody. We will come back to you later this week. You can always read our work in the meantime at BleacherNation.com. You can follow us on @BNBulls or here on the screen if you watch, but if you're listening, at MRooney23 on Twitter for Matt and at Schuster_Elias. That's SCHUSTER_Elias.
And if you're
on
listening,
Twitter.
go check us out on YouTube too, because why not?
Oh, please do. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you can see my dog randomly walk in the background.
Good point. If you like
That's what you can
dogs.
see. If you like
Selling point.
dogs, we're the show for you. All right, have a good day, everybody. Thank you for listening.